The number one thing you're doing wrong with your resume is you're designing it for yourself and not your audience. I'm an engineering manager and I've reviewed over thousands of resumes in my career, and in this video I'm going to tell you specifically what those mistakes are, how you can avoid it so that you can get a better shot at your next job. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. Nothing you can do with your resume can replace real-world experience. So if the job is looking for 2 years of experience with Android and you've had 2 years of experience doing server work on Django, there isn't something you can change in your resume to get you to be a better fit for the Android job. So for this video, we're not going to be talking about any experience you have or don't have. Instead, we're going to stick to how you can write about that experience on a piece of paper or two. Number one, your content. Let's start with what not to do. Don't put your photo on your resume, the place you belong to, definitely not your religion or your caste. Why? Because anything you put on there is something that the reader is going to look at and direct their attention to. You want that content to be as relevant to the reader as possible, and as Linkin Park would say, leave out all the rest. There's no need to mention which tool or operating system you use, because if you're used to using your fancy pants Mac and the company dictates that you use Linux for whatever it needs to, you are going to use Linux, and it's pretty easy to switch to. Next, app descriptions in your resume. If you work at Slack, it is kind of useless for me to know what Slack does written in your resume. Slack brings team communication and collaboration into one place, so you can know. I don't need to know this. If I needed to know about Slack, I would go on the Slack website and read about Slack. I want to know what you have done at Slack to help the company or the business. That then helps me understand what kind of a role you would play at my company if you were joining us. More on this in a minute. Next thing to toss out, objectives. Listen, we all want to do good work, live meaningful lives, get paid well while doing so, make a difference in the world and live a fulfilling life. There's no point in dedicating paragraphs to this in your resume, so just skip it. Lastly, confidential information. This one's a big red flag. This book has a quote that says, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. If you're sharing confidential information in your resume, such as daily active users, monthly revenue, things like that, chances are likely you're going to join my company and share my company's confidential information too. That's just not cool. Don't do it. At a very high level, those are the things you should keep out of your resume. Now let's look at things that you should include in your resume, starting with number one, relevant experience. Specifically relevant experience to the job and company you're applying for. And I would even go so far as to say make multiple copies of your resume. For example, if you're applying for a server-side role and one company is hiring for Spring Boot developers and the other one's hiring for Django developers, and you have experience doing both, I would make 2 different copies of your resume, one stressing on the Django experience, the other one stressing for the Spring Boot experience, and then apply to the companies respectively. This goes back to the original point I'd made, which is your resume needs to be written for the reader rather than yourself. If I'm looking for an Android engineer and your first sentence in your resume says how you've done iOS work, that's not as useful to me as putting your Android work at the top and then getting me interested in looking at the rest of your resume. This of course doesn't mean that you don't write about experiences on other platforms and technologies. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is the valuable space that you have and the top-down approach that a reader takes should be tailored by looking at what the company wants and structuring it such that what the company wants is at the top and then other information is at the bottom, because a diversity of experience shows that you have all of those skills under your tool belt and you are willing to be adaptable to the situation presented to you. Next, if you have the space, write about the libraries you've used and specifically what you've used them for. For example, don't just say that you've used getX state management. Say that you used it for improving the code base's structure so that a new screen can be added much more easily by a new person on the team rather than what it was before. Mention that you've used shared preferences for storing the user's time preferences, etc. This gives the company a good understanding about how far you are from what they want as the ideal candidate. Of course, include links to your GitHub, any websites, blogs that you might have, designs on Behance or Figma, etc. This gives people an idea about what it's like working with you, which essentially is what the interview process is about. Be careful though, people with a trained eye can easily tell when you've copied something from somewhere. So if you don't have one of these resources, it's best just not to include it rather than include it and then have it counted against you. How do you go about writing this then? You want to include the impact that you had on the business, customers or users, rather than just saying that I implemented XYZ tool. For example, you don't want to just write that you implemented sign in with Facebook. It's It's much better that you write something like increase the user engagement of the sign-in screen by 24% using sign-in with Facebook. It helps the company understand that you know what you're doing. This is roughly the equivalent between knowledge and experience. Knowledge is knowing how to use a tool. Experience tells you which tool to use when. You want to demonstrate that you have experience rather than just knowledge. Next up, let's talk about structure. How should you structure your resume such that the person reading it doesn't just want to skip on to the next one? The number one question in this regard is, should you use one page for your resume or extend into multiple ones? As a general guideline, if you're in your first year or two of your career, you can pretty much sum up everything in your experience in one page. For doing this, you're going to have to be really ruthless about what you end up putting on that piece of paper. And I know you really want to talk about that one time where you restructured the code base and now it's much easier for developers to understand the code that's going on. But remember, this is about the reader. It isn't about you, it isn't your biography. If it doesn't serve the reader, cut it out. For example, if you were leading a team of Angular developers from 2019 to 2020, does it matter that you should include the team size and the roles and responsibilities of the entire team? Yes, because that helps the recruiter understand what kind of a team size you're able to handle and what kinds of challenges will you be well positioned to be able to deal with. But should you need to write things like you conducted one-on-ones in the team, you handled interpersonal conflicts between the team? No, because anybody who's led a team for more than 6 months knows that if you've led a team of more than 2 or 3 people, all of these situations arise, and knowing that you've led a team means that you've dealt with all of these situations. Once you have all your information ready, lay it out in reverse chronological order. This is because your most recent experience is also likely going to be your most relevant experience. Oh, and don't be afraid to cut down on sentence structure for the sake of brevity. For example, writing something like integrated Google Maps increased engagement of order screens by 5% is much better than writing something like during my time here I integrated Google Maps into the order screen. This resulted in 5% better engagement of the order screen. And finally, let's talk details. Please, I highly recommend that you double check your work after you've finished it. Once you have these drafts of your resumes ready, make sure you take some time away, then come back, take a look at it. I'm sure you're going to spot something that you missed the first time, and that double checking of your work will help you not make a fool of yourself when you're sending it out. One-time effort here is going to have massive payoffs every time you send your resume to recruiters. Don't use raw links. This just shows a lack of attention to detail and it just wastes space. Make sure the text on your resume is aligned correctly. Ensure that you've run it through a grammar checker so that there aren't any spelling mistakes or grammatical errors. When you send your resume, use a PDF format rather than a Word format because you want to make sure that the reader is seeing it as you intended rather than however their computer chooses to interpret it. Use fonts consistently in your resume and highlight information as you want it to using maybe bold text or italics, as long as you're not doing it too much to try and catch the reader's eye. Some job portals look for keywords, so make sure that if you're applying for a React role, that React should be mentioned at least somewhere inside your resume. And with all of that said, remember that this isn't a silver bullet. Recruiters and readers are human beings. They have 100 other resumes lined up to go through. They are just as susceptible to mood swings as you and me. They have good days, bad days. So you can do all of these things and your resume still may not work, or it may shoot up all the way to the top. I've only tried to share with you in this video how I've gone about reviewing resumes. However, I do want to go one step further and try and actually review your resume. Send me your resumes at the Twitter link in the description, and I will pick 50 resumes at random and give you feedback about what you can improve in your resume. All feedback will be kept confidential, of course. Until next time, take care.